Hi, Loretta.
Hi, Antoinette.
I'm so excited to be recording with you again. I think you did, well, I don't think, I know you did the last 2 episodes. Thank you for carrying that for me.
Oh, my
It's
pleasure.
such a gift to work with somebody so that when you have to go off and do other important things, the other person can carry the load. And thank you for what you did and how you did it. And we decided today to carry on talking about intuition. So Loretta put out an episode last week on what is intuition and how to access it. And this week we wanted to relate it more specifically to health. Why is intuition so important if you're going to play a big role in your own healing? And mostly through examples, we're going to talk you through this because it was a very large part of my journey, and it's a very big thing that Loretta does with her clients to help them heal. So I thought to kick off, Loretta, to say that there's a term out there that I use all the time and people get confused by it. So I want to clarify it. I say to people, when something is counterintuitive, I know it's my intuition that's firing. And people say to me, but that doesn't make any sense because you're using the word intuitive, and now you're telling me when it's counterintuitive, it's intuition. So I actually went and looked up the word counterintuitive this morning, and counterintuitive actually means counterlogical. So it's what's that word you use in English? It really doesn't make any sense to say something's
Oxymoron.
counterintuitive.
Yeah,
Oxymoron. Because
oxymoron.
it actually means it's not happening in a way you would expect it to. And it's seemingly contradictory to common sense. And it means actually that you need to rethink the obvious route, which most people take, and the obvious route that you normally take. So I was a person, as everybody knows on this podcast, who was deeply steeped in spirituality and self-help and psychology on many, many levels for many, many years. And I have talked about this. I'm going to briefly mention it. When I got diagnosed with an aggressive stage 4 cancer, I knew that the intuitive decision would be for me to go to Gerson and fast, or just do something local. I knew how to heal myself. I mean, after all, I'd cured myself of fibromyalgia by fasting on water for 21 days. I'd walked this path and I had it taped. According to me, I was connected to all the right people. I knew exactly which institution to go to, whether it was local or overseas. But fortunately for me, I also was far enough down that path to realize a few things. Like I needed to go to a kinesiologist to muscle test what my body wanted. And actually, that's when the journey started for me of realizing that it wasn't my intuition that was firing, saying I have to fast. It was actually my patterning, my recent conditioning, not my childhood conditioning, would have been to go to an allopathic doctor to do chemo or do whatever they said. But I had not been on an allopathic path for 32 years, as you all know, but I'd been on a path that was so the opposite. And Loretta and I discussed this before, how I just became absolute, but in a very different way, on a different path, a path of very healthy eating, of fasting, of whatever, vitamin C drips or kinesiology, or there's countless things you can do on that side of the healing path to heal yourself or help yourself heal. So I was adamant that my intuition would tell me whether I need to go to Mexico, or I needed to go on a vitamin C drip, or I don't know, take more supplements over and above the 30 I was already doing. Because I was eating healthy, I was exercising, meditating, doing all those things, as you all know. So I start at the kinesiologist, and my body says, no, Please don't fast. Please don't go to Gerson. It begs me. It's too harsh. You've been doing that stuff your whole life. You just have to find joy to heal. And then the second thing my body says, please do chemo. And I trusted this woman, but I was absolutely freaking furious. I thought she'd lost the plot. And I said to her, no, I'm sorry. My body's not telling me that. Anyway, I'm not going to tell the whole story because a lot of things unfolded after that to prove to me that I needed to find joy, which I'm still trying to do, and also that I needed to do chemo. But because I was so anti-chemo and the whole allopathic world, and I really thought it would kill me long before it cured me, I just couldn't make that decision. And people also around me, because in that world, were very angry with me for even considering it. They were so judgmental. They were like, and it was a very, very hard decision for me. But a whole lot of things kicked in, as life does, when we know we have to become our own healers. And if we are intuitive, even if we're not really doing it properly, somebody fetched me and took me all the way 5 hours away from where I lived to an integrative oncologist, if there is such a thing in South Africa. There's one in Joburg. And he was the third opinion I got from an oncologist. And he said, if it was my wife or daughter, I wouldn't do chemo on you. Or if it was breast cancer or colon cancer. I'm just telling you what he said, okay? He said, but with this cancer, I would put them on it straight away because it's going to make you go disabled or go to your brain. It was at the top of my spine and in my throat. And he said, give yourself the gap with the chemo to go and do all the stuff you normally do or do it together. And I was like, okay, I have to do chemo. But I still couldn't make that decision for 3 weeks because I was adamant that was counterintuitive. And little did I know, it was just counter to the obvious route for me at that time. So I waited 3 weeks, and then one day in the bath, I said to my intuition, really, 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 what do you want? And it said chemo. So I went and did it, and the rest is history. I'm not saying you should go and do chemo, but that's what I needed to do at the time. So life is counterintuitive, actually. And I think intuition, Loretta will probably agree, is the thing that feels wrong, probably. Even if you've been on a spiritual path and self-help path, often, it's always the non-obvious, actually. And when we're on a natural healing path, or we hate allopathic, or we've been meditating, we think that we know what intuition and what isn't. But it's the non-obvious, actually. It's the emotionally difficult thing to do. You know the flack I got for doing chemo. I had to leave where I lived, actually, and I'm probably going to go back there now, but I got criticized. I mean, I just about got whipped. It was like, and it was emotionally exceptionally difficult for me because psychologically I was like, I can't do this. It's going to be so bad for me. It's like, it's the suffering in my head about making that choice. So if it's emotionally difficult, if it's not obvious, if it's a leap outside of your normal perspective, it's something I would never have considered, then it's probably your intuition firing. And Loretta will talk to this now, because the trouble is that we are influenced by anything on via psychology or health or spirituality. And actually wisdom is always counterintuitive or counter-logical. So I'm going to hand over to Loretta because this is such a passion of mine, and because I had to get seriously broken open through a disease, cancer, but it was the biggest opportunity for me on many levels. But this was a major opportunity because through my journey with chemo, many beautiful things happened, and I'm not going to go into them. And I didn't die, and so why are we bringing this to you in terms of helping yourself heal? Because if you cannot access your intuition, and I'm using Loretta's words now, you will be at the mercy of something outside of yourself. And in my case, it would have been a Gerson fasting expert, or I don't know, whoever I chose to go that natural route. For many people, it's the allopathic oncologist. And we've got to be able to make decisions from our higher self, our soul selves, from our intuition. And it's not always the whole picture. I mean, I had to do many other things. I still did many natural things, but that's the place where a large part of your healing lies. And Loretta can talk to this with some of her clients. So let me.
Thank you. So I want to pick up on a couple of things that Antoinette said. When you get diagnosed with a serious disease label, or even a not so serious disease level, it evokes a lot of emotion. There's a lot of fear. We've spoken about it. We did a fear masterclass. And the stronger the emotion is, the more difficult it is to distinguish between, is this the voice of my intuition or isn't it? Because it's clouded by that. And so Antoinette went to the kinesiologist, and the kinesiologist said her body said chemo, and then so she then she went to the oncologist, and the oncologist said, listen, lady, chemo. And then she had to wait until she had integrated that before her intuition confirmed to her chemo. So I'm not saying that that's right or wrong. That is a great illustration of how difficult it is to connect to your intuition when you are emotionally highly charged, which is why it's very useful to get someone to guide you through it at that point. Now, here is why it's important to exercise that muscle. It's like a muscle, right? The more you work it, the stronger it becomes, the better you can use it. So if you start exercising that muscle when you're not in a state of huge emotional turmoil, well, then it's going to be easier when you are in a state of emotional turmoil. But even if you have got practiced intuitive muscle, when you get a nudge from your intuition, when you are in a highly vulnerable emotional state, the minute your intuition tells you something, this is my experience, as soon as you come out of your little, oh, that was my intuition, your rational mind starts telling you why that was all a lot of nonsense and why you shouldn't believe that and why you need to doubt that. Okay. So this is why having someone that's neutral, that doesn't have an investment in whether you've got what you've got or what you choose to do, is really important. And I'm going to say someone neutral, because if you are being guided by someone who's highly polarized in one or other direction, it's going to be difficult for them to hold that neutral space for you to be able to connect to your intuition. So there's this guy called Napoleon Hill. Lots of you who are in personal development would have read Napoleon Hill's book. Okay, so Napoleon Hill went and researched all the wealthiest people in the world. I forget the name of the book. It's very famous. And basically, he found the common denominator. But one of the things that stands out in my mind about that book was he spoke about the mastermind. And he said that when there's more than two people, when there's more than one person, when there's two or more people together, and they're all focusing on something in common, a third mind, an extra mind appears. It's like you have access to information that individually you don't have, but when you put yourselves together, you do, right? So that's, I think, what happens very often with Antoinette and I on this podcast. She talks about something, I pick it up, I talk about it, and then something comes out of it, right? So when you've got someone who's neutral and has no investment in whether you choose whether you're going to do chemo or not do chemo, that person holds that space for you and helps you to connect to your intuition. But if you come and see me as a client, let's say, and I have a huge investment in what's right and what's wrong, chemo is evil, herbs are good, for example, all right? Or don't worry about any of that physical stuff. Just let me help you with the mind-body stuff, because that's all that matters. It's going to be harder. It's going to be harder for you to get it, all right? So this is why it's really important that you be discerning about who you choose to do this with. And that's also why it's really good to get a referral from someone, okay? So, that's a little bit off the topic. So that's the one thing. The other thing that I want to just say about my experience with people who are ill, and I've seen this especially with people who get diagnosed with cancer. Some were my patients. Some were the patients of an integrative doctor that shared a room, that we rented a room in my practice. The people who were constantly looking for the next therapy. So in other words, they were doing everything. They were doing the juice cleanse. They were doing the water. They were doing the ozone. They were doing the Rife machine. They were doing the kinesiologist. They were having the Reiki master. Okay, so nothing against any of those therapies. They might be amazing, but when you are operating from that place of fear, you are clutching at all these straws. And there is no right or wrong therapist, but there is a your way. That's what I believe. All right. So in other words, that's why my program is called The Healer Is You. Not because you need to heal yourself on your own. I mean, really, where did you become a doctor or a complementary medicine specialist or an energy worker? You don't have to be any of those things. But you are the one who knows yourself, or you are the one that can access your truth. And so a raw vegan diet may be true for you, but it may not be true for the other person. The other person may be true for them to be a carnivore diet. And actually, this is part of the problem in the sort of nutrition, complementary medicine kind of arena. You know, in allopathic medicine, you have a few tried and tested options. You know, some new stuff comes, might be a little bit more cutting edge, but you know, your options are relatively, I'm going to say, limited. So if you go to the oncologist, there's a protocol that they use for people with lymphoma. And, you know, that's the protocol, and they might adjust it slightly. Okay, but when you go to a complementary medicine person, integrative doctor, whatever, doesn't matter who, now you've got a plethora of choices. And of course, we all believe our therapies are the best, 100%. Okay, of course, because that's why we do them, all right? So you have so many options. So one person will tell you Gerson, one person will tell you water fasting, one person, and you know what? If you go on the internet, you will find 100,000 people to support that point of view that will tell you why that one is good and the other one's bad. And all that does is it creates more confusion for you. And it comes from this place that there is one thing. There is a thing. There is like a cancer protocol. And if everyone follows the cancer protocol, then there's a really good chance that the bulk of people are going to get well. Well, I have to say bollocks to that. After 30 years of trying to impose protocols on patients, of learning about other people's wonderful protocols, of seeing them work for some people and fail abysmally for others, and watching people desperately go from one therapy to the next therapy to the next therapy. And ultimately, it's not about the fact that they died, but just like badly, you know, like fighting, like just no peace in that whatsoever. I believe that that's what's driven me to this point where you know what, Loretta, you've got to park your opinions. You've got to park your idea of what you think is good and what you think is bad. And you've got to accept that with the right guidance, every patient will be able to find out what's best for them. And so that's why it is so vital that we have tools or techniques or processes, and we learn to listen to, and act on those intuitive hits. Because then what you do is you're like, okay, this is the thing that I'm going to do. Or this is the thing that I'm going to do. And then you do that thing. And it doesn't mean that that thing is going to cure you. It just means that thing is going to take you to a place where the next thing will appear. And it'll take you to the place where the next thing will appear. So I have I had a client who was referred to me by a colleague of mine. And she had cancer before, breast cancer. And she'd been in remission for, I think, 12 years. And the cancer had recurred. It was a different kind of cancer on the same breast, on the scar tissue where the lump had been removed before, but a different type of cancer. And by the time it was diagnosed, it was in the lymph nodes, right? So it was a stage 3. And she was a natural kind of bunny, organic food and, you know, nature and, you know, rhythmic living of life and, you know, complementary medicine and blah, 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 blah. And my colleague was like, I don't know, I think this woman needs chemo, but I'm sending her to you. So I had a conversation with her and I said to her, well, look, I've never done this before. I'll be quite honest with you. I've never done this on a first consult with someone. Like I've never done this on like a first time I've ever seen you, right? Because I generally sort of coach people into how we can get more in touch with our intuition so that we can get to the place where we can actually now get a definitive answer. But I knew that my intuition was this woman doesn't have time. You don't have time to bugger around with that. You need to help her find out what's true for her. And so I was like, okay, well, I can make a plan. So I cobbled a few things together, and I said to her, this is going to take an hour and a half, and this is what we're going to do. And the truth is, when it was a process, and eventually we got to the place where, like, what is your higher self? What is your intuition? You can call it your intuition, your higher self, your spirit, whatever. What is true for you to do next? And she just went, chemo. And she started off with, I'll do anything. I don't want to do chemo. And when she came out of there, I said to her, so now, and she was like, you know what, Loretta, that was so real, and it was so true for me. That's what I have to do. So now, please, I'm not like a connect your intuition and decide whether you have to do chemo or not expert. That's not what I'm saying. I'm selling myself as that. But what I am telling you is, even if you've got what that taught me was, you know what, Loretta, I have a bias. My bias is, if they've never done this work, they can't access the truth of their intuition straight away. That is a lot of nonsense, because that lady showed me that isn't true. So when you are in that place where you're really sick and you're lost and you don't know, right? And you're like, okay, well, now Loretta said I had to have exercised my intuition muscle, but my intuition muscle is puny, so I'm never going to be able to find out. Okay, you know what? Actually, everyone can access their intuition. You just need someone that will guide you. So like Antoinette went to the kinesiologist. The kinesiologist obviously wasn't attached to whether she does chemo or doesn't do chemo. What the kinesiologist was focusing on, finding the truth for Antoinette as her body was delivering it. And that's what she offered to her. So yes, it is a skill. Yes, you can develop it. But even if you've never developed it, it's there. It's latent in all of us. And in fact, all of us have had intuitive nudges. We've all had that. I mean, I spoke about it in the last episode, so go and listen to that. We've all had intuitive nudges. So we know what that's like. There is just, in my experience, there are some sort of, there processes that can lead you to connect to that. If you need to get an answer relatively in a hurry. Now, I just want to say one thing to this, and then I'm going to let Antoinette speak again, is that the answer is not necessarily what you want. It's exactly what Antoinette said. You know, it's not going to be what is normal and usual for you. So I want to add to that. Your intuition is never going to tell you to do something that's impossible for you either. So because your intuition is not going to point out the next 25 steps, it's just going to point out the next step. And everyone is capable of taking the next step, right? So if the next step is having that difficult conversation rather than pretending everything's okay. If your pattern, your coping strategy to fit in, be liked and be loved is to pretend that everything's okay when it's not, your intuition may nudge you to have the difficult conversation and just speak your truth. You don't have to be mean. Just say, you know, this, I'm not comfortable with this, or this hurt my feelings. When you said this, my feelings were hurt, and actually, I don't really want to do this, or whatever it is, right? It's going to be uncomfortable, but never impossible, because it's only ever the next step. So when Antoinette's intuition in the bath said to her chemo, it didn't say, Antoinette, chemo, then leave the Midlands, then learn the Sparkles meditation. You got to do all of this at once. She didn't get all that. She didn't get like one massive download, this big PDF of what her healing journey was going to look like. She just got the next thing. Just the next thing. And when you do the next thing, remember, the next thing prepares you to become that version of you that can do the thing after that. And you can then become the next version of you that can do the next thing. That's why you don't get step number 10, because you are not the version of you that can do step number 10 yet. You have to do step number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And then by the time you've done step number 9, of course you can do step number 10. So it's uncomfortable. It's not in your comfort zone. It's not impossible. Anyone can learn how to do this. And if you are in a pinch and you are confused and you're conflicted and everyone else is telling you what to do, get someone to help you. And my last thing I want to say about this is sometimes your intuition will tell you nothing. It'll do nothing. It'll say nothing will happen. You'll be like, my intuition doesn't work. No. I've learned that I often get nothing. You know why? Because I just want to do something to make me feel more comfortable. So doing shit is my comfort zone. Doing nothing is really hard for me. So it's like, do nothing is like, just allow it to unfold. Just trust and see what happens. Oh, I'm better with it now. But in the beginning, it was absolutely bloody awful. So when you get nothing, it doesn't mean your intuition isn't working. It means do nothing. Just do nothing for a period of time and then check in again. And maybe tomorrow it's still telling you to do nothing. And maybe the next day you're still doing nothing. But maybe the next day you're not even checking in. You're walking on the beach, or you're lying in the bath, or you're in the shower, or you're driving your car, or you hear a song on the radio, and suddenly that's the next thing. That's what you're going to do. That's how I, in my experience, how it's worked. And I did tell you on that last episode, honestly, if you told me 5 years ago, I'd be telling people, connect your intuition so you can create your own best healing path. I'd be like, nonsense. People don't know what they're doing. They need experts to tell them what to do. Well, you know what? You are the expert of you.
Yeah, Loretta, there's so much wisdom in that. So we've also been, we also think as soon as we have the vision of the end result, that we kind of, the whole plan is laid out. And I can tell you right now, it's not, because the first step, and I had terror around doing chemo. It wasn't just fear, I can tell you. And then it's like another step came and another step came. And actually, I need to write my story, because if I look at the steps that unfolded, it was like, wow, it became such a quantum spiritual healing journey. But flip, it started off with chemo and all the fear that went around that. And the other thing is step by step, and the next step will be revealed to you, but deal with that step first, because I had to deal with the fear around chemo, and it's going to kill me and I'm going to have a heart attack. And then I had to deal with I had to deal with all of that before the next step got revealed, actually. And just to know that I would play a role as my own healer. And I had no idea what would unfold, but I had to let go of what I thought were the healing steps. And that's quite hard. And the other thing is to not be influenced. Sure, that's hard, because when you've got cancer or anything hectic, and when you've hung around in a very natural alternative world, which I still do by and large, but everybody has a solution that is definitely going to work for you healing your cancer. And I just want to tell people, I know people do that out of kindness and because they love us, but if you know how much stress that caused me, I had to just switch my phone off. And then people were upset because I wasn't communicating. I'm like, I can't take another YouTube clip or a diet or something that you think is going to heal me, because here I am choosing chemo. And so you can share something with somebody and say, this feels right to you, but if they don't feel it's right for them, you've got to step back from that. Because once you take all the other quantum, esoteric, amazing things came to me, including me meeting 2 people who had incurable cancer months before me. And they're both still alive 8 or 9 years later. But we used to meet regularly. And it was so interesting to share our different journeys. The one girl went off meat, went completely raw food vegan. She did Chris beats cancer, cured herself of 2 incurable breast cancers, is very well and alive, helps other people with that kind of diet and lifestyle. I had to start eating meat and I started drinking coffee actually every day instead of once a week, and I ate a bit of cake. And I'm not saying my journey is right or her. And then the other woman, fascinating, she had 3 months, she was given 3 months to live and she's still alive. She was like, well, I'm kind of trying out everything. And she was working with a homeopath who was testing her bloods, and he was very integrative, as in willing to do the allopathic tests. And she tested cannabis, no cannabis, diet, no diet. And she found there was no difference. What really worked for her was cannabis. It didn't really work for me. And frankincense. She swears by that. But she did both allopathic and natural. And it was so fascinating. Sorry, this is a bit of a long story, but it just talks to all of this. Is when we used to meet for a coffee or breakfast, the vegan lady, and she still will. She orders 100% vegan, and then the other lady with the brain cancer used to order like bacon and eggs and all that. And I was just totally freaking confused, to be honest. But in the end, it's like we just used to laugh about this and share notes, but none of us judged each other or told each other what to eat. So those are three completely different healing paths, and we all got there if there is somewhere to get. So the thing is, though, you got to be prepared to be unpopular, whether it's with the people who want you to do allopathic or it's the people that want you to do the vitamin C drip. And Gary Ramsay said the same when he decided to go to Mexico instead of the state-of-the-art hospital in New York. People were so angry with him. Some of them still don't talk to him. So, and the other thing I just want to say, Loretta, to what you've said is anybody can access the intuition. But for me, I've realized, and that's why Loretta and I talk all the time about doing the work with the unconscious, about your conditioning, accessing those part of yourselves you don't know are there. For me, and I got there a long way. I mean, if you can go to a Loretta, it's freaking amazing. Well, I suppose I went to a kinesiologist, but the more self-aware I've become, the more self-aware I've become, the more I've realized my patterning and my coping mechanisms, which one of the next steps that came to me was the P&I book. And I talk about the shadow questionnaire in there. And the shadow question was the first thing I did. And my shadow showed me a part of myself I didn't know. And then so did an Anita Majani clip. So I realized I was absolute. I realized I was always dissatisfied. And then I started creating extreme self-awareness about how do I behave? How do I react to things in any situation? And the more I've done that, and the more I've worked with reprogramming the unconscious, with rewiring my brain, with seeing my role in everything and how I've actually caused it or I perpetuated, how deep I was into conditioning, although I thought I was because it was like love and light stuff. So, and nothing against any of that. I still do all of that. But I started I started more and more accessing my intuition. But up until 3 years ago, I was still confused because intuition and ego can easily be confused when you're, especially if you've done a lot of anti-society stuff or you've done like, I take a different route. And I was like, I mean, my intuition's telling me now to leave a seaside village and go inland. And honestly, my mind's still struggling with that. But what I do, when I know now when it's counterintuitive or counter-logical, it's almost definitely intuition. But what I've been doing for about 3 years now is that test it. You can do that. You can test God, the divine, your higher self. You can test it. I say, well, if you really want me to move to the Karoo and away from the sea, I need evidence now. And 3 points of evidence. Otherwise, now I know when my intuition's firing. So the main thing for me now is not to share it with people who are going to try and influence me, change me, tell me why it's a mess. But when I couldn't trust it and I didn't know the difference, I used to say, well, prove this to me now. I need 3 points of evidence that make this obvious, not just like some bloody YouTube clip of some random person. And every single time it got confirmed. And then I made the big move. The first thing I was told is to move to the Eastern Cape. And I was like, that's ridiculous. But I took a step which people thought I was insane. I mean, people don't live where we live because it's so backward. Meanwhile, it's the best kept secret in this country. And also, I didn't know anyone, etc., etc. Anyway, it's the best freaking thing I ever did in my whole life. And that one thing made me realize if I listen to that little inner voice, which, as Loretta says, it came to me in a car park at a mall in Durban after a fight with a friend, it doesn't come from me in meditation or visualization processes or yoga. But, sorry, I'm going back to something Loretta told me before we recorded. Doing those processes that Loretta tells you about and doing the other stuff which I still do, means that when you are in the car or crying because you've had a fight with your friend, or you are walking on the beach, or you're just chilling and relaxing, and then this thing comes, then you go, ha, well, where did that come from now? That's counter-logical, counterintuitive. Is this something I need to do next? And then you just got to start following the steps. The big thing I had to overcome, Loretta, is the resistance, because I was like, how am I going to move? And also not knowing how, because intuition knows how it can happen. Intuition knows that miracles are everyday order. Intuition will guide the way, but you got to let go of the, how am I going to move to the Eastern Cape? I don't know anybody. I'm alone. It's going to be terrible. And it's a backwater. I'm never going to find a decent homeopath. And I was like, so I said to Spirit, to my higher self, because it wouldn't go away for 6 months, will you show me the next step? And the next step was a thing that didn't work out, actually. But that next step led to the next step. And I ended up living in a place I'd never heard of, because I just followed all those little steps. And it's been the best thing that's ever happened to me. So, yeah.
I just want to say to what Antoinette just said. She said, yeah, she took the next step and then it didn't work out. And that's a very, very important thing. Just because you're following your intuition doesn't mean it's all going to be peachy. So sometimes you follow your intuition, because remember, at the level of the divine or actuality, right, there's no good or bad. There's no like good or bad experiences. There's just experiences, right? So when something turns out badly, it's because in your mind, you had a perception of how it should have been. One view of how it needed to be. So when I make a business investment and when I invest my money into, I don't know, some sort of shares or something, and I, in my mind, have an idea that these shares have to perform at 15% with compound interest and that I'm going to be a cajillionaire in 5 years, that's my idea based on what I've got from other people probably, but that's how I think it needs to turn out. And when those shares plummet and I have no money at the end of 5 years, I'm like, well, that was wrong. Well, no, it wasn't right or wrong. That's just how it turns out. And sometimes our most negative experiences, those things that seem to be wrong, are one of the stepping stones in the direction of where it is we need to go. So a good example of this is movies, like adventure movies, like Star Wars or Indiana Jones or those movies. You know how in the beginning they go off on their adventure and then they make a couple of dodgy choices along the way. And you're like, oh my God, don't go in there. This is not going to end well. And then they go in there and it doesn't end well. But whatever happens in that crisis gives them whatever they need to like take the next step. And eventually it all ends well because the hero conquers. Okay. So your story to your healing is almost never going to be linear. So, by the time Antoinette had her second or third dose of chemo, she was as sick as a dog. Okay. Like lots of side effects, right? It wasn't feeling like healing at that point. That probably didn't feel like, oh, this chemo was the best idea I ever had. So because her intuition told her to do the chemo, it didn't mean she wasn't going to have the side effects of the chemo or the difficulty of the chemo journey, but it was a step in the direction. So a lot of times we want to hear the voice of our intuition so that we don't get it wrong. If that's what you're doing, it's not your intuition. Your intuition is not interested in whether you get it right or wrong. Your intuition is interested in you taking the next step so that you can create what you'd love to create, which is your health in this instance. So if you would love vibrant health because you've still got things to do in this world, you want to have a relationship, you want to see your grandchildren, you want to have adventures, whatever it is that you want, right? Whatever that is. Your intuition is going to guide you to take the next step in the direction of that. And sometimes that step is not pleasant. Also, when it's your intuition, it doesn't mean that your rational mind just rolls over and goes, oh, well, she's following her intuition now and plays dead. No.
Oh, gosh, no, the opposite.
It's going to be telling you 24/7 why this is a terrible idea. And then when it doesn't turn out the way you expected, it's going to say, yeah, I told you so. And okay, so you have to be prepared for that. And that's why the self-awareness that Antoinette speaks about is it's one of the reasons why it is so vital. It's vital that we understand what our unconscious limiting beliefs are. It's vital that we understand what our patterns of behavior are. It's vital that we understand how those patterns drive our choices and have gotten us to this place. So if you, and this is not so that you can feel bad about yourself, but if you've made choices and you've had patterns that have got you to being sick, you don't want to continue those same choices and patterns, because how are you going to get a different outcome? And whenever you have to do something that you're not used to doing, it's uncomfortable. And sometimes it looks semi-disastrous. Like when you're hanging over the toilet bowl and you're vomiting and your hair's fallen out and you feel like you actually wish you were dead at that point of time because you feel so ill from the chemo. I've never had the chemo, but I've seen people who've had chemo, right? It's hectic, right? At that point, Antoinette's intuition isn't saying to her, oh, well done, this is all going to be peachy. And your ego is not saying, oh, that was a great decision doing this. Okay, that's not happening in your head. And so that's why it's very important that you can cultivate that being the watcher of your mind, okay? So that you can just create a little gap between that voice, and so that you can realize, okay, this is the voice of my rational mind. This is the voice of my intuition. I am the master of all of this because I am not just being sucked into one or the other, if that makes any sense. Okay. So it's not always peachy. And it doesn't always have to be difficult. Sometimes, in fact, so this has been my experience. The more you learn to trust it and the more you do it, the easier things flow. Bad things still happen. Things still don't always turn out exactly the way you want. But you know what? Those obstacles turn into stepping stones. They turn into the stepping stone to take the next step. So you can either view it as an obstacle, or you can ask yourself, how can I turn this obstacle into a stepping stone? What is this? What is this? And it's easy to do in hindsight. It's much easier when it's over. You can look and go, oh, I see how that obstacle became that stepping stone, which became that stepping stone, which became that stepping stone. So if you're looking for answers from your intuition because you want the easy way, or when you're trying to connect to your intuition because you're terrified and you want the right answer, there isn't a right or wrong answer. There's just the voice of your intuition. And that self-awareness, sorry, Adrian, that self-awareness, it quiets some of those other voices because your intuition is soft and everyone else's voice is loud. So, John DeMartini said, when the voice on the inside becomes louder than the clamor of voices on the outside, then you have begun to master it.
Beautiful truth. So it's simple, but it's not easy. Like I had to give up my business as well. If you know how many changes I had to make, big changes in a year. And money is a big thing for us humans. Money and health and relationships. It's like I cannot live in the middle of nowhere like I live now. I can't not earn this big salary because I had a business which paid me even when I wasn't working much. And I was like, I can't do that. And I had to do it. I knew I had to do it. And I didn't sell my business for a very high price. And was that comfortable? Was it easy? Flipping out no ways. And a lot of people have told me I was irresponsible because I have no way the amount of money I did have 7 years ago, because I've lived off my savings and I probably have taken it too far. But everything when we get out of our own way comes towards us. Miracles are everyday order and they land like butterflies. But people put that out there as memes, and I do too, but it's not actually that simple. It's like, sure, you have to jump off the cliff. Like I got out of my own way, not knowing I did. The terror was so huge when I gave up my business, and the terror of not having money recently, as Loretta knows, come back into my psyche. It's like, oh, I've got no money and I'm this age. And then I was like, oh no, Antoinette, you know better than that. That terror, that driving money, it never brings the money because you're in your own way. You're in your ego, your logic, your fear. So I was like, what do I want to do and what do I love? And this is what I love doing. And we haven't made much money, but the money came from it just came. It's astounding. In the last however many months we've been doing this, I'm like, what? The receiver's giving me money back, or this? I didn't expect this. I got a rebate on my insurance because I hadn't claimed. And I was like, And I've actually had more than enough money, to be honest. I can't carry on like this. I need to make an income. There's real life. But I listened to a clip. I only started this morning because I was Googling what does counterintuitive mean, and this amazing clip came up. I'm going to put it in the show notes. And he started off with a quote from White Men Can't Jump. I don't even know what that is. Sometimes when you win, you really lose. And sometimes when you lose, you really win, because success in your health, in anything financial, is counterintuitive. And Loretta's example, I know, is also hard work, money. It's like, but what has your intuition been telling you to do lately?
Yeah, and I think that's a great place for us to end, right? What has your intuition been telling you to do lately? And can you make space for it? Because it requires space. So can you make some time and some space for it? Just like building a muscle requires you to either work out at home with weights or go to a gym or whatever it is that you need to do, right? So working your intuition muscle requires you to like get a bit still, like be still, make some space for it, make some space and set that intention, at least, that this is what you are after. And then, but if you don't make space for it, then it's going to be difficult for you to receive it, because these other voices are loud, like super loud, right? So that's why it's really important that you. Sorry,
carry on. Why you?
You
have to separate yourself from the herd, and you have to feel uncomfortable. And all of those things only come, Loretta's right, when we create space for quietness, for self-awareness, and
Cool. So I think that brings us to the end of this episode. Antoinette, it was lovely recording with you again. I was a bit lonely those other 2 times, I must be quite honest with you. I'm so used to working on my own, right? So you'd imagine that would be nicer for me, but actually this is much nicer for me. So thank you that we could be doing this again. And thank you to those of you who are listening or watching. And if you found this useful, please would you share the link with a friend? We'd be very, very grateful, so that you could help us get our message out to more people.
Please give us feedback, because in this episode it might have seemed we weren't talking about health, and I hope we gave enough examples, but ask us questions, give us feedback, tell us if you need more clarification, because when you've been on this path a long time, I keep on telling Loretta, you use language, and I probably also, I forget how much I've had to do and how long it's taken me to get to this path. So we might just be saying things that to you are like, so ask questions and give us feedback. We really need it as well.
We really appreciate it.
I missed you too. And we'll be back together next week. So thank you for listening, and let me stop wobbling on. Bye.
Bye.